I don't care what people say, but let's talk about the fact that COVID quite literally was traumatizing for many of us. I just got back from an event, and one of the professors attending, super awesome by the way, was talking about this and just talking about student engagement and students back in the classroom and how campus life isn't what it used to be. But instead of saying that the students aren't engaged and, things that I've heard a lot recently, he flipped it and said that COVID has monumentally impacted students and people, recent graduates, alumni, in ways that we could have never imagined. And he mentioned that the cure to this, well, how do you treat patients that might be undergoing symptoms of PTSD? And I know those are on different planes and there are different levels, but that's something I want you to think about. And comment below how COVID changed your life.
What's happening? Is post COVID trauma real? I, I guess I'm biased because I'm older. I'm closer to 50. And I've seen people talk about it and they're younger and it affected them. And part of, and I guess I'm going to be anti, but part of me is like, I don't buy it. Do I get it was a pandemic? Absolutely. Do I get people were in the house and they might have been cabin fever? Absolutely. I get that. What I don't get is this. At that time period, in that era, um, being socially awkward or being to yourself or being on your phone all the time or being in your room and not interacting with your family, and being on dates and not paying attention to the date and being at school and not paying attention in class, all of this was a thing prior to that. So from my perspective, I'm like, okay, so what what group was this really affecting? Because prior to that, we were always talking about how people aren't outside anymore. People don't really interact anymore. People aren't going out anymore. People aren't really, getting in relationships prior to COVID happening. And then it happened and people were in the house and it's like, okay, y'all was already in the house though. Like that's like, what are we talking about? You already was, you already didn't have friends or didn't interact with your friends. What's the big deal? Now, part of me is like, okay, because the opportunity was taken away to distance yourself from people, and everybody was just distanced. I think that traumatized people more. Like people, they didn't give you a choice to go somebody. You get what I'm saying? You didn't have the choice to not engage, and I think that's what messed people up. That, oh man, you know, the world the the world can't interact on how you feel anymore because there's a pandemic that's affecting everybody, right? And now it's not all about you anymore. And then, like the pandemic was like 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago. And I find it interesting because, you know, people were in school and people had breakdowns. And let me say this, because I remember at that time, my son was in school, but he had to work from home and he couldn't do it. Like he was like he was freaking out. Like he couldn't do it. It's like because it's like it's too much work. I'm on a computer. That concept of getting up and going from this class to that class to that class, and whatever the interactions in the lunch, that was taken out, and he had a problem with that. And for me, I'm still like you be on the phone and playing video games and not studying half the time. So what are we talking about? Like, oh, now it's too much because at that time, and this has been a thing. There have been a lot of students who are rather, um, I want to do it on my own. Why I gotta do it on this schedule? And you know, part of that concept is also this. This is why people have a hard time in college, because when there's no, you set your own schedule, and you got to get yourself up, and you got to be responsible for yourself and your grades and your classes and all, and this, that, and the third. And when it's on you, you have there's a sizable portion of people that they'll drop out and say college isn't for me. But the truth of the matter is, for some of those people, them being responsible for themselves isn't for them. So I bring that into that conversation with this pandemic thing. You were forced to be with you, and there was nobody to blame. There was nobody to look at. It was you or you. And I can say this, um, because I know there's a demographic of people who they have a hard time being alone. They have a hard time being in the house by themselves. And sometimes it's they're lonely and it messes with them. And sometimes people's mind, they can't deal with it. It's kind of like solitary confinement. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's just me and these four walls and I'm going crazy, because everybody isn't built for, like, hey, like I can sit in the house all day, all night. I can be a homebody, I'm but I work outside, and I'm an outside person, so I don't feel the need to be outside. When I'm chilling, because I've already been outside, and I've been like that since I was a kid. So that's a me thing in general. And there are some people like me in that aspect, but I know there are people who are inside, and you know, being inside for a long period of time. Now I want to be out and I want to move and I want to get around, and I get that too. But for me, I just can't buy the concept of there's trauma 5 years later. You know what I'm saying? You had time to reacclimate. You had time to start interacting. You had time to um, get in, build friendships and build relationships. You had all that time. So if this happened 5 years ago and you're still traumatized, it's like I'm like, are you holding on to that because that's the most traumatic thing that's happened to you in life? Which means, in my opinion, you had a pretty good life. You know what I'm saying? You had a pretty good life. And even when it comes to the academic situation, and I remember, and this wasn't even my generation. I remember though, when they used to think about world wars and nuclear bombs, they used to have kids doing a bomb drill where you get under the desk in case the bomb goes off, right? Like it was gonna save you. But those people who are in their 60s and 70s, they don't even talk about that traumatizing them. They're like, hey man, hey man, and that might did that go on? I don't remember that happening in the 80s. I really don't. It could have went on in some places, but the schools I went to in the 80s, I don't remember that being a thing. Because I remember the Berlin Wall falling and all that other stuff, the Cold War, that type of thing. But prior to that, that was a thing. You know, we were on a stop, drop, and roll kind of thing. It was a drug epidemic when I was young. But that's the I guess the issue for me personally, is I don't trust. Um, I think people are just looking for something to be an excuse because you just too soft. That's how I look at it. Because you know, a lot of y'all, a lot of y'all use the pandemic. Y'all don't use the pandemic in this way because part of BLM was in the pandemic, and some of y'all were protesting, but some of y'all were just outside because it was a pandemic and it was a free chance to get outside. So were you really in the, going for, like, I'm here because I'm fighting for rights? Some of y'all were, but some of y'all weren't. Some of y'all were like, ooh, I could break the rules and be out and I could run through the streets. It's like, yeah, whatever, man. But that doesn't traumatize people. Uh, Another thing that kind of gets me about this stuff is this. One of my cousins lost his life during COVID, not to COVID, to something else. And I remember like we couldn't do the funeral because we had to do the funeral like basically like a Zoom meeting. And I say that to say I know it affects my aunt and uncle per se because you couldn't view the body or whatever because they wouldn't let you, you know, because of the travel and them not letting you necessarily in. So it was like one person could go to the morgue. Um, and I know people had to have funerals in the same way. And I say that to say they seem less traumatized by the pandemic than people who and didn't have any of those issues. You get what I'm saying? And maybe it's because what happened was more extreme than the pandemic itself. And I can see that. But for some of y'all, it's like, bro, what are y'all talking about? Like, oh, it happened 5 years ago and I'm forever changed. Like, really, truth be told, it was like a year. You know what I'm saying? You can feel like you lost a year, pretty much. Don't act like this it went on for like 3 years straight, because that's not true. But I'm gonna leave it at that, man. Tell me what you think. Peace.